The lobby of the Haverfield Hotel smelled like cinnamon and industrial floor wax. And Nora had been on her feet since 6 in the morning. She stood outside the service entrance on Clement Street with her catering apron folded over one arm and Lily's permission slip in her jacket pocket. The one she'd already signed 3 times because the school kept losing the forms. And she watched the street for the car her cousin had said would be there at 4. The city was cold. The sky had gone the particular white it went in November before deciding whether to rain. She had $14 in her wallet, 11 in her checking account after the rent notice, and a family reunion to survive. The black sedan was already at the curb when she stepped down. She assumed it was Cousin Mateo's friend, the one who did ride shares on weekends. She assumed because the windows were tinted and the engine was running and she was cold and tired, and she opened the rear door and got in, and only then understood that the man already seated in the back was not Cousin Mateo's friend. He was still. Still the way a room is still when the electricity has gone out, when something that was generating noise has simply stopped. Dark eyes. A coat that cost more than her monthly rent. He did not look at her immediately. He was reading something, a folded document. And he finished what he was reading before he looked up. She should have gotten out of the car. She would think about that later in the small hours of several subsequent nights. She should have apologized and opened the door and stepped back onto Clement Street with its cinnamon smell and its impending rain. The permission slip slid out of her pocket when she reached for her phone to call Mateo, and it fell between the seats, and the man picked it up without being asked, the way a person picks up something that has landed near them, and he read the name on it. Lily Vasquez, age 4, approved to attend the Redwood Grove field trip. Nora's phone number, her address. He held the slip out to her. His name was Charles. She did not know that yet. She would not know that for another 12 minutes, when the sedan had been moving long enough that asking to stop felt like more work than arriving. If you have ever been very tired and in the wrong place and unable to locate the moment to correct it, if you have pressed play on this to hear a story about a woman who got into the wrong car and what it cost her and what it gave her, then stay here, because the cost and the gift are both true. 3 weeks before that sedan, Nora had been standing in her building's hallway reading a certified letter, 2 months behind on rent, approximately $1,400, due within 15 days or the eviction process would begin. She had read the letter twice, folded it along its original creases, and put it in her jacket pocket next to a grocery list and a packet of crackers she'd been saving for Lily's aftercare snack. Then she had gone to work. She worked the catering department at the Haverfield, where she set up chafing dishes and managed linen counts and smiled at guests who addressed her by pointing at what they wanted rather than speaking. She was good at the job. She was fast, precise. She could read a ballroom's flow from across the room and redirect a service cart before anything became a problem. And none of that competence was visible to the people who employed her because competence in service work was the floor, not a distinction. Her supervisor called her Nora, or was it Nina, and had done so for a year and a half. Lily was 4 and had her father's eyes, which was the only thing Nora had kept from that particular chapter. The apartment was a 1-bedroom in the outer Richmond. The mattress in the bedroom was Lily's. Nora slept on a folded blanket over the couch cushions she'd laid on the floor. And she had done this for 6 months and had told no one because there was no one to tell who could do anything about it. Her mother was hosting the family reunion, the one held every 2 years in a rented hall on Fortuna Avenue. Nora had considered not going. Then she had considered that Lily had been talking about Abuela's cooking for 3 weeks and could name 4 specific dishes she was going to eat. And Nora had signed Lily up with Mateo's carpool arrangement and planned to meet them there after her catering shift ended. She had not planned to get into Charles Kim's car. He told her his name on 19th Avenue when she finally asked, direct and without introduction. Just Charles. The driver, a compact man with close-cut hair who wore his calm like a credential, was Marco. Marco had not been surprised to find a stranger in the back seat. Or if he had been, his surprise had already been processed into professional neutrality by the time Nora registered him. She had told Charles where she was going. She had explained about the wrong car, about Mateo, about the reunion. She had watched his face for the irritation that would mean she needed to manage the situation, the performance of patience that cost someone something they'll collect later. She did not find it. He asked Marco to adjust the route. Marco did. Nobody asked her any more questions. The hall on Fortuna Avenue was strung with yellow and white lights, the kind her mother reused from Christmas because the reunion was 6 weeks before the holiday, and the lights were already in a box. Nora could hear the hall before she saw it, her aunt's voices carrying through the double doors propped open with a folded cardboard box. She thanked Charles. She gathered her apron and her bag, and she opened the door. Donnie was waiting at the entrance. Her older sister was 42 minutes older than their agreed arrival time, and several $100s better dressed, in a cream coat that required dry cleaning, with her hair done in the style she wore when she wanted people to take photographs of her. She was talking to their cousin Pilar when Nora came through the gate, and she looked up and her expression underwent a small, specific adjustment, the kind that isn't a wince, but neighbors one. "You look tired," Donnie said. Not quietly. Pilar was right there. Nora said she'd come from a shift. "You always come from a shift," Donnie said, and turned back to Pilar, and that was the end of it, which was worse somehow than if it had been a longer exchange, as if Nora's exhaustion was simply the weather. She found Lily inside with Abuela, face already ringed with the evidence of at least one empanada, and she held her daughter for a moment against her chest and breathed. Outside, the black sedan was still at the curb. She saw it through the hall window when she straightened up. She told herself it was a coincidence of street parking. She went to get a plate of food she was too tired to eat. The man who found her in the parking lot 20 minutes later was not a coincidence of anything. His name was Felix Duarte, and he had sold her ex-husband a debt that had somehow, through mechanisms Nora had never fully understood, migrated into her name. The amount had been something under $400 originally. It had grown the way these things grew when the person managing them wanted it to. He had come to the reunion because the address cross-referenced with the family name and Felix Duarte was thorough. He caught her on her way back from the parking area where she'd gone to find a signal to call Mateo about the carpool. He was not loud. That was the specific quality that made him hard to dismiss. He spoke at a volume that required her to stand close to hear him. And he used her full name, and he mentioned Lily by name as well, which was the part that went cold in her chest. The debt, he said, had reached approximately $3,000, and if she preferred not to discuss arrangements, he had other means of pursuing it. And he smiled when he said this, the smile of someone who had found his leverage and was comfortable holding it. She told him, steadily, that she understood, and that she would need documentation, and that she was going to walk back inside now. His hand closed on her arm. Then it didn't. She had not heard anyone approach. The parking lot had been quiet, and then it wasn't. And Felix's hand was gone from her arm, and Marco was standing between them with the stillness of a man who had been asked to be somewhere and had arrived. Charles was beside her, not touching her, not reaching for her, but close enough that the cold air shifted. He did not raise his voice. He said something to Felix at a pitch Nora couldn't isolate, and Felix stepped back, and then Felix was moving toward the street with a pace that had lost all of its earlier authority. When she turned to look at Charles, Donnie was standing in the hall doorway 20 feet away with their Aunt Rosa and Cousin Pilar, all three of them having stepped out at precisely the wrong or right moment, and every one of them had seen. Charles's eyes moved from the street to Nora's face, and his jaw was set, and she felt for the first time that his stillness was not the absence of something, but the presence of a great deal of something held very precisely in place. "Does he come back?" she asked. "No," Charles said. She believed him the way she believed forecasts about weather that had already arrived. Inside, Danny had already begun her assessment. She pulled Nora aside near the drink table while their mother was occupied with the food trays, and she said, in the voice she used for observations she considered obvious, that the man outside was not someone Nora should have in her life. That Nora had enough to manage without attaching herself to complications, and that people in their family had worked hard to be seen a certain way, and that Nora should think about the impression she was making with her current choices. Nora listened. She said she appreciated the concern. She got herself a glass of water. Charles had come inside. He stood near the far wall with Marco, who had materialized a cup of coffee from somewhere and appeared to be reading a message on a phone with the focused air of a man managing logistics. Charles was not reading anything. He was watching the room the way Nora watched a ballroom at the Haverfield, calibrating flow, assessing weight, knowing before a problem became visible that it had already started to form. He looked at her once, across the room. Nothing in his face moved. She looked away first. Lily found him 40 minutes later, the way 4-year-olds find things, with no self-consciousness and total intention. She walked up to the man by the wall and told him she liked his coat. Charles looked down at her with an expression Nora could not fully read from across the room, something that had gone still in a different register than his usual stillness, softer at the edge. He crouched to her height, and they spoke. And Lily laughed at something, and Nora watched her daughter reach into the pocket of her own small jacket and produce a folded piece of paper, the crayon drawing she carried everywhere that month, and hand it to him with the absolute confidence of a child who has decided someone is trustworthy. He took it. He did not unfold it. He put it in the inside pocket of his coat with a deliberateness that said it would still be there tomorrow. The ride home that night was arranged by Marco before Nora had gathered her things, a fact she registered but did not yet know how to refuse without making a performance of refusing. Lily fell asleep in the back seat against Nora's arm. The city slid past outside. When the sedan stopped at her building, Marco held the door, and Charles said only that she should lock the deadbolt after she was inside, which she did, without examining why she felt steadier for having been told. She discovered the rent the following Thursday. She had gone to pay the building manager the $1,400 she had put together from 3 separate sources, a loan from a co-worker she'd promised to repay by December, the last of a savings account she hadn't touched since Lily's 2nd birthday, and a shift she'd traded into on her one day off. She had counted the money twice and put it in an envelope and written the unit number on the front. The manager told her the account was zeroed. Both months, paid in full. No note, no name on the transaction record, just a wire transfer from an account the manager could not identify, received 4 days prior. Nora stood in the building hallway for a long time after that. She was not relieved. That was the thing that surprised her about herself. She was something more complicated than relieved, something that lived in the same neighborhood as gratitude and bordered on anger and couldn't decide which street to live on. She had not asked for this. She did not know how to not owe something she had not asked for. She put the envelope back in her pocket and went upstairs and made Lily dinner and did not call anyone. She did not have Charles's number. She had not asked for it, and he had not offered it. What she discovered the next morning on the kitchen counter was a phone she did not recognize, a basic device, fully charged, with one contact saved in it, labeled only M, and a text already in the conversation that read, "Single call connects to Marco, for anything that requires it." She had not been in her apartment when it was left. The deadbolt had been locked. She put the phone in her jacket pocket next to the grocery list. She did not examine the implications too closely. She was very tired, and the implications were large. She thought about the $1,400. She thought about the way Felix Duarte had said Lily's name. She thought about a 4-year-old handing her crayon drawing to a stranger, and the stranger putting it in his coat pocket as though it mattered. She went to work. 3 days after she found the phone, Charles found the drawing. He had been in a meeting that ran through the evening, and afterward, standing at the window of an office on the 16th floor with the city grid below him, he had reached into his coat pocket for a pen and found the folded paper instead. He unfolded it and looked at it for a long time. A man at a steering wheel, rendered in blue and brown crayon, a child's economy of line. The car had 4 wheels of different sizes, and the driver had one arm longer than the other, and there was a sun even though the background was clearly night. Underneath, in a 4-year-old's careful printing, the word safe, the letters different sizes, the E slightly backwards. Something in him that had been filing this situation under operational obligation stopped filing it there. He refolded the drawing and put it back in his pocket. He had her building address. He had obtained it from the permission slip, the same slip that had confirmed the name of her daughter and the name of the school, and the fact that the emergency contact number was the same as her own, because there was no one else to list. He did not go to the address. He sat with the drawing in his pocket and the city below him, and registered what had changed. When Nora came to the door 2 nights later, she had not been expecting anyone, and the sight of him in the building hallway made the air shift in a way that she chose not to name. He had come to tell her that Marco would be verifying the building's points of entry because the man from the parking lot had a history with a particular group of people who moved debts between names. And that group had a connection to a network that made proximity to her current address worth reconsidering. He said this plainly, the way he said most things, the words carrying their weight, without decoration. He had arrangements he would be making, and he was here to ask her preference on specifics rather than act without her knowledge. She let him in. Her apartment was small and bare, and she was aware of both as he stepped into it. The folded blanket on the floor where the couch cushions made her bed, the collapsible table with Lily's drawings covering half its surface, the window with its view of the building opposite. He did not look at any of this with judgment. He looked at it the way he looked at everything, which was to say with complete attention, registering what was there. Lily was asleep. Nora made coffee because she needed something to do with her hands, and because the kitchen was 7 steps away, and 7 steps felt like the right amount of distance. She brought him a mug, and they sat at the table, and she asked him a question that had been sitting in her chest for 10 days. She asked him why he had come into the hall on Fortuna Avenue. Not why Marco had stepped into the parking lot, but why he personally had. He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone formulating an answer, but the quiet of someone deciding how much of the true answer to give. He said he had read a name on a piece of paper, and the name had meant something to him before he could explain why, and that by the time he had an explanation, the decision had already been made. Nora's hands were around the coffee mug. The kitchen light was the warm kind, a lamp Lily had picked out at a second-hand sale, shaped like a small yellow mushroom, which was not the kind of lighting that was supposed to be in this kind of conversation, and yet was the lighting they had. She said she couldn't know him. She said this clearly, the way she had said clear things her whole life. Things like, I can't accept gifts I didn't earn, and I will handle this myself, and I need documentation. Because she had learned early that dignity was the only currency that always cleared. She could not owe $1,400 to someone whose other debts were settled the way Felix Duarte's had been settled. Charles looked at her for a long time. His voice dropped a half-tone when he spoke again, the quality of it unhurried, certain. He said the rent was not a debt. He said it was the kind of thing a person does when they understand the situation and are in a position to do something about it. He said she could name it however she needed to, and it would remain what it was. She looked at him. The lamp made the room yellow and small. His coat was on the chair back. In the left interior pocket of that coat, she now knew, was a folded piece of paper with a backwards Z. She did not resolve anything that night. She let the open question sit between them like an object neither of them was ready to move. And after a while, he left, and she locked the deadbolt, and she stood in the kitchen for a long time before she slept. The second family dinner was her mother's birthday. 3 weeks into December, and Danny had organized it because Danny organized things that allowed her to stand at the center of them. It was at the family house, and there were 14 people at the table and a tree in the corner that Lily had helped decorate with a focused, creative energy that had resulted in every ornament being placed on the bottom 2 feet of branches. Nora brought a dish, a rice preparation she'd been making since she was 15. She arrived with Lily and a bottle of wine she'd bought with money she could justify only by telling herself it was a birthday. Charles arrived at 8. She had not told him there would be a dinner. He came because Marco had mentioned it, and Marco had mentioned it because Marco tracked the things that bore on his employer's attention, and Nora had become one of those things. He arrived with a bottle of something clearly beyond the register of any other bottle on the table, and her mother received him with the complete composure of a woman who understood that certain men had a specific weight to them, and that weight was not threat. Donnie took the measure of him across the table. After the main course, during the interval when the table was partly cleared and the conversation had fractured into smaller exchanges, Donnie said, loudly enough for the table's center to hear, that she was glad Nora was making friends, and that she hoped Nora wasn't letting herself get carried away with gratitude. Since some men, Donnie said, used generosity as a way of installing an obligation, and that Nora, she said, had always had trouble knowing when she was being managed. The table had gone the way tables go when someone has said something that cannot be unsaid in front of witnesses. Lily was on Nora's lap. Senora Vasquez had set down her spoon. Charles did not look up immediately. He finished what he was doing, which was folding a napkin. And then he looked up, and his gaze settled on Danny with an attention so complete and unperformed that it had the quality of a weight being placed on a surface. He looked at Nora then. He said, without volume, that Nora was not a charity arrangement or a managed situation. He said she was someone he intended to keep in his life, and that he expected the people in her life to understand that. He said this in the plain register he used for things that had already been decided. And then he looked back at the table, and the dinner resumed. Donnie did not say anything else for the rest of the evening. 3 of Nora's aunts found things that needed refilling in the kitchen. Rosa caught Nora's eye from across the table and gave her a look that said she would require a full accounting at a later date. Lily, who had been present for all of it and had processed none of it, asked for more rice. 2 days later, Marco left a message on the mushroom lamp phone. He said it was a courtesy notice, professionally polite, that a man named Volkov had been observed in the neighborhood near Lily's school, and that his employer was aware and had taken steps, and that the steps were sufficient, and that she should know. He said this in the tone of someone reporting weather. Nora knew the name. She had heard it from Charles 3 nights prior, in a conversation she had asked for directly because the open questions had grown numerous enough that ambiguity felt less safe than information. He had told her about Dmitry Volkov, the way a person describes a professional problem, naming it without embellishment, a rival operator who had been watching the eastern side of the city for a redistribution of presents, who had recently become aware that Charles had a particular attention he'd never had before, who was the kind of man who read attachment as access. She had asked what steps meant. Charles had said the situation was managed. She had said, "Lily is 4 years old." He had said, "I know." She had believed him, and the believing had cost her something, because it required trusting a capability she had no independent means of verifying, and she had spent 4 years trusting no capability but her own. She held the phone for a long time after Marco's message, and then she went to pick up Lily from school. She was in the schoolyard, 20 feet from the gate, when she saw the 2 men on the sidewalk outside. She knew what they were the same way she'd known the sedan was wrong, and the way she'd known Felix Duarte was not going to leave politely. There was a specific quality to men who had been given a task and were waiting to execute it. A settled patience with no social framing around it. One of them was watching the gate. The other was watching the street. Lily came through the gate with her backpack and saw her mother and started toward her. The man by the gate stepped forward. Nora moved into the space between them. She was not large. She was not armed. She had a catering apron in her bag and approximately $47 and the phone Charles had left on her kitchen counter. She used the phone, one press of the screen to the single contact, while simultaneously talking to the man in front of her, asking him questions with a confidence she assembled out of desperation and the knowledge that a 4-year-old was watching. What was his name? Was he from the school? She would need to see authorization. She was going to need to see written authorization before her daughter went anywhere with anyone. She had learned at the Haverfield that authority was often a performance, and that another performance could delay it. And she performed now. Lily understood something was wrong and held Nora's hand without being told. It took Marco 4 minutes. She counted them. The 2 men were still managing the situation of Nora's questions when the black sedan came around the corner from Taraval Street, and Marco and 2 other men she had not met got out of it with the specific quietness of people who have no need to announce themselves. The men from the sidewalk made a decision and got into their own car and left. Nora stood in the schoolyard with Lily's hand in hers and felt the shake move through her knees, which she had not allowed while the men were present. Marco came to her, and she told him she was fine, and he nodded and said he understood, and he said that his employer would like to speak with her when she was ready. And she said, "Right now, please." Charles was at the office on the 16th floor. She arrived with Lily on her hip, still in her school clothes with glitter on her jacket from some afternoon project. Charles stood when they came in. His face went through something when he saw Lily that he did not conceal and probably could not have. He crossed the room. Nora's account of what had happened was short and factual. "Lily," she said, "outside the school, 2 men. She had delayed them." She handed him the phone and said Marco came. She had been right to use it. He said yes. He said it in the particular way he said things that were the end of a calculation. And then he said something in a low voice that was meant for her, not for Marco or the 2 other men in the room. He said he was not going to let this happen again. She looked at him and said, "I know you believe that." And then, because she had been in a state of elevated control for 4 minutes and 4 years and long enough, she let him put his arm around her, and she stood in the office on the 16th floor with the city below them and Lily examining a paperweight on the desk. And she was still shaking, and he held that without comment. What happened to Dmitry Volkov happened over the following 72 hours in ways Nora was not present for and did not witness in detail. What she knew was the Marco's next courtesy message, 2 days later, said the situation had been resolved and that the organization Mr. Volkov had been operating was no longer operating in the city, and that specific arrangements had been made with relevant parties that precluded any further interest in her or her daughter, and that she should consider the matter permanently closed. Permanently was the word he used. She turned it over several times and decided Marco was precise with language and did not use it carelessly. She thought about what it had taken to close something permanently. She thought about Charles's hands, which she had seen at rest and which she had never seen when they were not at rest. And she thought about the city outside the 16th floor window and the particular way authority operated when it had no intermediary. She was not naive about what closed permanently meant. She also thought about Lily's face in the schoolyard, the specific way her daughter had looked when she understood something was wrong and had gripped her hand. She thought about Felix Duarte saying her daughter's name. She thought about a backward Z. She made the decision that had been building for 6 weeks, quietly. The way she made every decision that cost her something, at the kitchen table before anyone else was awake, with coffee and without ceremony. The holiday dinner was at Charles's building on the 23rd of December. She had met his inner circle in pieces over the preceding 2 weeks, a cousin who ran the books with the focused precision of someone who had been told twice that imprecision had consequences. 2 lieutenants who had registered her status without being told and adjusted their posture accordingly. And a woman named Celestina, who was Charles's mother's sister and who had made the specific assessment of Nora that older women in families make. The one that looks at how a person holds a plate and whether they listen when elders speak, and had delivered her verdict privately to Charles, which Nora had not heard but had seen the evidence of in the way Celestina now spoke to her. Lily had called Charles by his name from the beginning, which he had not corrected. By the 3rd week of December, she had begun calling him Charlie, which he also did not correct, and which Marco found quietly funny in the way Marco found things funny, which was without his face moving. Danny attended the family Christmas gathering at Senora Vasquez's house on the 22nd. She arrived with the cream coat and the expression of someone who had recalibrated their position and was attempting to do so without appearing to have moved. She said to Nora, before dinner, that she had perhaps been harder than necessary at the birthday table, and that she hoped Nora was well. Nora said thank you. She said she was. She said Lily was asking for the specific empanadas. Could Abuela make the ones with the cheese? And they talked about empanadas, and that was that. It was not forgiveness, and it was not a relationship renewed. It was a door left a few inches open because their mother was in the kitchen and the holiday lights were on and some things were not worth the cost of closing. The dinner on the 23rd was 20 people in a dining room above the city, which Lily found completely comprehensible because she understood large dinners and the noise of many people talking at once and the process of locating the specific adult who would give her a second dessert. Nora sat across from Charles at the table and watched him manage the room without appearing to. The light touch of a man who had understood for a long time that the most effective form of authority is the kind that looks like stillness. She thought about the sedan on Clement Street and the folded permission slip and the way he had crouched to Lily's height in the hall on Fortuna Avenue, with an expression she had not been able to read at the time. She could read it now. After dinner, when the rooms had fractured into smaller conversations and Lily was asleep on a guest bed in Charles's actual coat because she had asked for it, and he had given it to her. And Nora had watched this happen with something spreading in her chest that she did not try to name or contain. Nora went out to the balcony. The city was below her. The holiday lights were on across the grid, the kind of sight that requires a high floor to understand the scale of it. How many people were inside their lit windows right now? How many had their own empanadas and their own cream coats and their own back rent notices? The air was cold and clean, and she stood in it. She heard him come out. He stood beside her, not touching her, and he put his coat over her shoulders because she had come outside without one. And the coat, his second coat, was warm and immediate and smelled like cedar and cold air and wool. She did not move away from it. He said her name, once, the way you say a name when the name itself is the sentence. She turned to look at him, and she understood then, completely and without any work left to do, that this was what chosen felt like. Not the version she had been taught to wait for, the loud, declarative performance of it, but this quiet, steady wait of being seen by someone who had looked at her specifically, and had not looked away. She said, "I'm not going to be good at this." He said, "I know. Neither am I." She said, "Lily." He said, "Yes." She said, "The people who come with you." He said, "They already know." She leaned into the coat, not toward him, just into the warmth of the coat. And he stood beside her, and they looked at the city. And the holiday lights went as far as she could see. In the morning, Lily woke up and wandered out to the kitchen and found Charles making coffee with the focused concentration of a man who did not cook, but understood the specific importance of breakfast. And she climbed onto a kitchen stool and watched him with the expert critical eye of someone who has strong opinions about mornings. And she said, "Are you going to be here tomorrow?" He said yes. She considered this. She asked if she could show him a drawing. He said yes. She went to get her backpack, where she kept the current drawings, the ones she was working on now, which had grown more complex in recent weeks and included, Nora had noticed, a recurring figure in a dark coat behind the wheel of a large car with 4 uneven wheels. In the living room, on the shelf beside the window with the city view, framed in a simple black frame, was the folded crayon page, now unfolded and pressed flat. The man at the wheel, and the backward Z and the word safe in careful 4-year-old printing. Nora stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room, her coffee in both hands. And she looked at the frame and then at the kitchen, where her daughter was telling a story to a man who was listening with complete attention. And the city was bright through the glass. The doorman, when she went down for groceries later that morning, said, "Good morning, Ms. Vasquez. Have a good holiday," with the ease of a person using a name they have used before, the name belonging to the building now, belonging to the floor, belonging to the family assembled inside it. She said thank you. She said she would. She meant both